My name is Brenda Himmelgarn, and I'm Dean of the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all here this evening. Thank you so much for joining us for this very special gathering. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this evening we are gathered on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continues to influence our vibrant community. I'm so glad to see so many members of our faculty in the audience here tonight, and I extend a sincere, warm welcome to all of you, to your families and to your friends, to our friends from the Department of Music, and to those of you from the community who've come to join us. A special thanks to Benty Roed and the Roed Family Foundation for their support of the Here's to Your Heart concert series. And a very special welcome to the Honorable Salma Lakhani, Lieutenant Governor, and her husband, the Honorable Dr. Zahir Lakhani, who's actually a clinical instructor with the Department of Medicine. And I also want to welcome Dr. Greta Cummings and her husband, Garnet Cummings, who are also members of the faculty, and Dr. Cummings is our Dean of the College of Health Sciences. So thank you for joining us this evening. You may have heard of the Here's to Your Heart concert series. It's a time-honored tradition in the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry. And for years, there were 2 or 3 of these gatherings. And in fact, one of the last gatherings that we had was in early March, when we were very fortunate to have Mr. Barry Schiffman actually present and perform at that gathering. And it was the last gathering that we had just days before the pandemic struck and everything shut down. And we're very fortunate to have Mr. Barry Schiffman here again tonight, along with Mr. Dennis Brott as well. So it's going to be a very enjoyable evening. So, after a break of several years, this evening is even extra special. It's an opportunity to celebrate all of you and to thank you for the commitment and dedication that you've shown throughout the pandemic. Whether you've been teaching or mentoring, doing your research, or working on the front lines in healthcare, your incredible pressure and facing unprecedented challenges, you've all given so much, and I really and sincerely thank you for that. I'd also like to thank the many people who worked so hard in making this possible. Dr. Jonathan Choi, who deserves a special round of applause. He worked incredibly hard at pulling this all together. I'd also like to thank the musicians from the faculty, the Dean of Education, Dr. Jennifer Tupper, for providing rehearsal space for the orchestra, and Dr. Patricia Tao for creating this series all those years ago. And of course to our staff, Raylene Lightfoot, Valerie Gall, and Shelby Soke, for your work in organizing all of this, and to the MacEwan University for accommodating this event as well here this evening. And I want to say a special thank you to our guests, Dennis Brott and Barry Schiffman, who will be sharing powerful stories with us. Thank you to the members of the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra for joining our group to make music together. And I'd especially like to thank the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry Orchestra that you're going to hear from tonight. These are incredibly busy people, very talented people, who managed to find the time to come together to rehearse and prepare for this evening. Music has the ability to bring people together in a special way, to comfort, to soothe, and to open our hearts and minds. So I hope that you will enjoy this special performance and that it provides each and every one of you with a respite from the stresses of your busy lives. So thank you again for joining us, and I'd like to welcome Dr. Jonathan Choi to the stage.
Thank you, Dr. Himmelgarn, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. I was going to mention that Dr. Lakhani was one of my former teachers, clinical professor of medicine, and inspired me to do cardiology. And tonight we actually have multi-generational students and clinical instructors and teachers here, including some of whom will be playing with us on stage with Mr. Brott and Mr. Schiffman. So it's really a special time. just a brief mention, we're actually going to go into a little bit of a chat with Mr. Schiffman and Mr. Brott first, and then we'll show you a video on how we created this and how it all came together. So I just want to start, first of all, by introducing Mr. Dennis Brott. He's got an extensive biography, and mon français est très mauvais. So I'm not even going to try to pronounce, but he founded the Montreal Chamber Music Festival, and he is also a professor of cello and chamber music and conductor of can I just translate that to English? The Montreal Chamber Orchestra, and a member of the Order of Canada. And he was, and we'll talk a little bit about that on stage, he was the first patient to be admitted to the CHUM Hospital in Montreal, teaching hospital of the University of Montreal with COVID yesterday was his 3rd anniversary. And so we'll hear a little bit about that, but I'd like us all to give a warm welcome to Mr. Dennis Brott on stage, please. And of course, the other piece about COVID was Mr. Barry Schiffman, who I believe it was like a week ago, 3 years. We brought him here, he gave a concert, and then within a week, the entire world was in a lockdown. And we're really grateful that he has brought chamber music. Both of them will be playing with us in the orchestra, and we're really honored. Barry is the director of the Banff International String Quartet Competition, a founding member of the St. Lawrence String Quartet, Associate Dean at the Royal Conservatory of Music. Welcome to the stage, Mr. Schiffman. So really grateful for both of you to join, and really we decided that the better way to do it instead of a lecture really is a casual conversation. So it's a really interesting and significant time for both of you. And as we mentioned, this week marks the 3rd anniversary of you being admitted to hospital with COVID, Dennis. And a lot of people in the audience looking forward to hearing your story. But before we do that, I wanted to turn to Barry. But actually, an interesting exercise I wanted to do is, who has knowingly not had COVID in this room? Put your hand up. Interesting. Okay. Who has not been impacted or affected by COVID in the last 3 years? Put your hand up. Okay, we have one. It's great. Now, I just want people to sort of think back on where they were. March 9th, I remember that. We're all in a lockdown, and for the next month, just think back, what were you doing? How did you feel? Did you feel isolated? Did you feel scared, uncertain? What was the world going to become, right? So I just wanted to hear first, maybe turn to Barry first, like, how did this impact your world, professional world as a musician? How did the musicians cope? And if I asked you, 3 years ago, would you have been able to predict what's happened now?
Mm-hmm. No, 100% no. Before I share about musicians, just a quick anecdote. I remember very well the night before lockdown because I was at a wedding of 2 ER physicians, and the entire wedding party, 100 people, was doctors. And I remember thinking, this just doesn't feel right. But nobody knew what was coming the next day, and I thought, oh my goodness, I hope we didn't just take out half of Ontario's healthcare at that wedding. But no, absolutely nobody, no musician, no doctor, no scientist, no politician could have imagined what was coming. And I think more than anything, the performing artists, the musicians that I got to witness were utterly and totally unprepared and impacted in a way that I think was quite horrific and quite unnoticed maybe. So I wear several hats. As Jonathan said, I'm associate dean, so I'm responsible for training program for about 250 young classical artists. As well, I work in Banff where I'm responsible for a competition whose mission is to launch careers of the best emerging chamber music players in the world. And I also run a festival, a 5-week chamber music festival in the summer in Massachusetts. So I saw all these various organizations impacted. Banff was the most heart-wrenching to witness. So remember that the Banff Center is in the middle of the national park. The national park closed. The Banff Center laid off 90% of its staff. The town of Banff was at 91% unemployment within a few weeks of the pandemic. And it was just shut, essentially. The Royal Conservatory where I work, we pivoted to online. We pivoted to online. There is no such thing as successful online chamber music. And I'm telling you that as the Associate Dean. And we did as well as anybody can do. Zoom. It happened that I was on faculty at Stanford for about 9 years, and one of my closest colleagues was the foremost expert in audio over networks technology. So I know what's possible. I saw what's possible in terms of making music remotely with or without Zoom delays. It's not possible at any real level. So I saw my colleagues, musicians, go to zero income and zero music making. And I saw in Massachusetts, the entire organization essentially go into a holding pattern. I can't even, it's impossible to exaggerate the impact on so many people. I particularly was very, very lucky. Unlike Dennis, I didn't get sick. I had my income protected. I was making pretty much the same income from my various employers. And yet, I was witnessing all these young musicians and older musicians go to zero work. And it was awful. And I became very, very grumpy. I'll be honest. I became an expert to present concerts online and do this, and we can present a series of online concerts, and we can, promote that this is. It was all window dressing to what was really a catastrophe that we all lived through. And I became, as I say, quite grumpy. And I had a very close friend who lived across the road from me on our street on Ellsworth Avenue in Toronto, and in May, so a few months into the pandemic, she said, Rebecca, Rebecca.
Yep.
She said, "Hey, why don't you come by my place and we'll read some chamber music." I thought, "What are you talking about?" "No, on the lawn. We'll just read some chamber music on the lawn." And I was like, "No, not interested." At that point, now when I look back, I know that some depression in my life, right? I'm like, my entire world's upside down. I'm not interested in making music. So I said, "No, I don't think so." She said, "No, you got to do it." And I had not opened my case now, so it's March. It's like end of May. I have not opened my case, and so I pick up my case. And Thursday night, 7:00, I go over to her place. I remember it well. I had violin in this hand, and I took a beer. And I was much more excited about the beer than the violin.
Was the
at that
can
point.
open or not yet?
And three of us meet on her lawn, and we start playing. And after about 20 minutes, I was like, "Oh, this is actually pretty fun." And people started listening, just a couple neighbors, and so we did it again the next Thursday, and the next Thursday, and then more people started coming, and then 6, 8, 10 of us are making music on the front lawn, And now it's the only thing in the week that's really regular. 7:30, Thursday, at Rebecca's place on Ellsworth Avenue, there's a concert. That became the focus of my life, and it was fantastic. And you'd see people by Thursday at 7:30, people walking down our street who I'd never met before, but who live on our street with their young kids carrying, a lawn chair down the street to Rebecca's house. And kids, dancing on the sidewalk, chalk art. It was spectacular how the coming together around a concert, only because of adversity, it was quite sunny. And that was one example that happened across the country thousands and thousands and thousands of times. And so, we look for silver linings. That was about as silver lining as I experienced. And it reinvigorated my own sense of why it is we do what we do. Remember, these concerts were not professional. There was no reason to do these concerts from a professional we weren't getting paid. The same way what's happening on stage today with all these music makers who are not professional music makers, but music is a big part of it. We're making, there's no less joy making music as we do now as non-professionals than there is as professionals. And in most cases, the professionalization of it hampers the joy. So that's it. I think, the silver lining is to reconnect for professionals with the core reason we do what we do. And I can go on and share all the catastrophes that happened during COVID, but I think we know that. We know what they were. We saw people unable to pursue what they had dreamt they were going to do, but the silver linings are what we will remember.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And certainly, just looking at the people around, how music has drawn us together, right? And I really am grateful to Mr. Broad for coming and being willing to talk about something that was not the easiest to talk about. I'd like to turn to you, Dennis, and if you could just maybe take us back to that week in March 13th, 2020.
Well, first of all, I don't know whether I need this. Do I need this, or does this work? Can you hear me? I don't know. Can you hear us? I'm not too sure if you can. No one expected the catastrophe that was COVID. No one was prepared. No one had imagined what this might be. Of course, if you had any grasp of history, which I'm sure all of you do, this had happened before, about 100 years ago, when a plague descended on the world and a virus wiped out millions. No one had a sense of the oncoming disaster. I'm sure none of you did. I certainly didn't. And I was at the time, to go back to that particular period of time of March 2020, I was in Europe. I teach in Europe as well at the Netherlands String Quartet Academy, and I'd been teaching there, and I'd been teaching at the Royal College in London, and had a concert scheduled at a luthier, which is an instrument maker shop. He is a specialist in the cello and gives concerts. And I was playing with a young string quartet and had a wonderful time, and returned to Montreal, where I live, on the 11th of March. My partner did not get sick at all, so it's unlikely that I caught the virus while in Europe and with her. 2 days later, I developed a 40-degree fever and all the associated ills that come with that. Had no idea what I had. Of course, people knew that COVID was happening around the world, particularly so in Europe, more so than in North America at the time. Anyway, long story short, it was impossible to get a test. Nothing had been set up. And I was on the phone literally 24 hours a day, meaning on hold, and only to be disconnected or to fall asleep while on hold. Finally, about 6 days later, I was able to get an appointment for a test, all this time living with this 40-degree fever. I live in the country, so I had to drive myself to the testing center, which was in Montreal. And I arrived at the testing center, which was at the Notre Dame Hospital, and there were 300 people in a line snaking outside into the parking lot, and a guy handing out masks. And so I got in line, took my mask, and waited and inched my way forward and forward. 2 hours later, I had made it inside the testing center, but was so unwell that I collapsed. And that was the best thing that could have happened to me. Because I got immediate ER attention from the Urgence Santé, the health workers, who carried me away on a stretcher after having taken my vitals and realizing I was one sick puppy. And I was taken to this hospital called the Centre Hospitalier de l'Université de Montréal. It's a teaching hospital. Many of you may know it. It's a sort of state-of-the-art hospital in Montreal. And as it so happened, I was the first COVID patient admitted into the ICU. They had not quite set things up in isolation as things turned out. And of course, no one knew what to expect. But my body basically gave out. And I was put on a respirator and in an induced coma where I stayed for 32 days. Along the course of these 32 days, I am told, my family was called more than once to expect the worst, because, as you all know as physicians, all kinds of complications arise from COVID, and I was a bad case. And, function of liver and function of kidneys, and let alone being in this induced coma and all those horrible drugs which you have to take to keep you in that induced coma, which are essentially hallucinogens. So I survived. Obviously, I'm here. I ended up spending 45 days in the hospital. I came home an invalid. I had lost 25 pounds. I had lost a huge amount of muscle mass. I couldn't walk. I sort of shuffled with a walker. And as part of my recovery, when I finally became conscious, I remember very much realizing how fortunate I was, but also being completely disoriented because a month of my life had passed and I was not aware of what had happened. One of the doctors found out I was a musician, and after I came to, asked me if I would like to listen to some music. And of course I wanted to listen to some music. I was in isolation. There was nobody to even talk to. And I was in such a terrible state I couldn't even compose a telephone number on my cell phone or work my computer. I got locked out of everything, every electronic device that I possessed. And he brought me a CD player and several CDs. And I could not be more grateful to this day to this doctor, who was actually an oncologist, not one of my physicians at the time, but was aware of who I was and what I did for a living. And music began to revive me in a way that I had not imagined. And then and there, I said to all of the hospital workers with whom I was engaged, physiotherapists, doctors, and so on, I'm going to come back and play for you. Now, that was a tall order, because aside from the ramifications of the physical deterioration, I had lost the ability to play. The strings felt like razor wire. My hands trembled. I could not produce a sound. It took me, I guess, 3 weeks from the time I got home, which was May 4th. So I went into the hospital March 20 and came home May 4th. And fortunately, my son came to my rescue and lived with me because I was not able to look after myself. And anyway, the recuperation took a long time. But getting to the cello after 3 weeks home was one of the more depressing moments of my life, realizing that my voice, because for a string player or for a musician, your instrument is your voice. I was not able to speak that voice, speak that language of music. And I was determined. I am a sort of stubborn person. And that's a good thing in this case, because I put myself to the task of rehabilitating myself, which was sort of like imagining what it might be for an 8-year-old or 10-year-old to take an instrument in their hand and just, what is this thing, you know? Anyway, to make a long story short, I became very committed to bringing music to the hospital workers, to the professionals who had saved my life, and to also, as Barry mentioned, dealing with the issue of what other people were suffering, in particular, my care for nurturing young talents, realizing that these amazing talents, particularly people who had just graduated, those were the worst affected, who had no job, who had no ability to earn, were auditioning for positions, trying to find a way to put their professional expertise to work after 20 years of study, and suddenly couldn't. So I did a few things. Number one, I started a whole direction for this festival that I run called the Montreal Chamber Music Festival that was digital, like a lot of other people did. No, not rocket science. It was just the only option at the time. But I dedicated it to young people. So my first idea was, okay, contact 10 of the most promising young Canadian string players and ask them to record themselves and describe what a day in their life was like during COVID. So this was early on in COVID. And you're welcome to go and check out those videos. They're on the website of the Montreal Chamber Music Festival. Quite fantastic. Everybody recorded it and themselves on their iPhone in 1080p, gave them certain instructions of what needed to be done. And so each video is about 10 minutes. And it's fantastic how creative these people were, how they dealt with this horrible isolation, this complete stoppage in their life, in their professional activity. And then I also realized that, we couldn't give concerts, so I wanted to bring some Canadian artists back to my festival audience. And so I created another video series which was called Home From Away. I stole the title, as in come from away. Bringing people like James Ennis, people like John Kimura Parker, people like the St. Lawrence String Quartet, people like Joseph Kaiser, the great tenor, Canadian tenor. Digitally recording themselves performing, talking about their lives, and in this case, playing something. So there was a complete performance. Those are also on the website. So it created all kinds of creativity for me. So in a way, COVID, it completely changed my life physically, but also professionally in a very significant way. Let's not forget chamber music, and we were talking about this earlier before to the Lieutenant Governor and her husband, about the fact that chamber music is democracy in action. It is one person per voice. Everybody has to work together so that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That's in essence what chamber music is. And it brings people together, not only those who are actually doing it, but also those who are participating in the conversation, because what's happening on stage is a conversation in the language of music. So this program here, and I really feel I want to communicate this as forcefully as I possibly can tonight, how fantastic this is, Jonathan. What you've done, your idea, bringing us all here together in this room to share this experience, but also to realize, hey, we need this. We need to communicate together in a community, to think about the community as a whole rather than ourselves, and share this beauty, this incredible gift that music is to all of us, those who listen, those who perform, and share this as something greater than ourselves. And you've made this happen. So thank you for that.
Well, first of all, I'm not going to take all the credit because I think it was my wife's idea. However,
Behind every successful man, there is a successful.
but I told her because she's playing the harpsichord tonight, I have her back because I'm right behind in the viola section. But so yeah, we talked a little bit about how music, it's a visceral experience. Like, who was it? Were you saying Glenn Gould said that the CD would replace live music?
Well,
Or-
Glenn Gould predicted, when was it, Barry? I mean, at least 50 years ago.
Yeah.
He said that classical music would die, that the orchestra would die, that there would no longer be live performance. He hated performing in public. And later in
Boy,
his...
was he wrong.
Boy, was he wrong.
As the Associate Dean of the Glenn Gould School, it's my great pleasure to tell you how wrong he was. It makes me upset I didn't get to challenge him on that. The idea that music would be better experienced not in a situation like this. He saw live audience and the performer as kind of gladiators, and I think he somehow miraculously missed it. He missed the point. He missed the joy of what this is supposed to be. It's really, I think it's
And
quite
this
sad.
despite the fact that among musical minds of the 20th century, he figures as one of the greatest.
unbelievable.
Without question, as a performer, as an interpreter, as a thinker, as a creator. Don't forget, he not only played the piano, he did all kinds of very interesting things centered around communication, fascinated with the North, fascinated by indigenous peoples before it was fashionable to be. Quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we also talked a little bit about the fact that in the past, before all these digital electronics, you want to listen to music, you had to either produce it or somebody had to produce it for you in a live performance.
Well, I mean, the origins, of chamber music. What's a chamber? Well, basically, your living room. That was the chamber. And even in my own case, my own family, my mother, who played the cello, she took up the cello because her father was a pianist and her mother was a violinist, and they wanted to play piano trios. Now, don't forget, go back just 100 years. You couldn't listen to music without either doing it yourself or going to a concert. Mm-hmm. So it was part, and go back 400, 500, 600 years, that's how music brought people together as this marvelous language of communication. Families, friends, professionals, amateurs, like we have tonight. This was an incredible part of culture, with a capital K, throughout the world, Western world anyway, and the traditions of pieces we're going to play for you today go back to that time. So chamber music was this incredible communion of spirits, of human beings together. Fortunately, we have some incredible repertoire that's left to us by the masters. And to this day, on this stage tonight, we're going to share all of that with you.
So I don't know if I should feel guilty. We kind of did the same thing. I've got two boys who played the violin, inspired me to take up the violin. And then I started viola because nobody wanted to play the viola. We'll come back to that. And then we put our daughter in cello, so now we could theoretically do a piano quintet.
Yeah.
we'll get there someday. I always think like Barry and I connect in some ways because I would love to be kind of like Barry. Our dogs are named Rosie. We both play the violin and viola. But anyways, so back to the
He's not
viola.
a doctor, though.
No, I was going to say, you don't want me anywhere near you.
Let's come back to that. We were talking about this. So Dennis says to me, so we invited them, and he said, well, I need an hour to practice tomorrow morning before we do anything else. I said, it's interesting. Here's a professional, and he's about to perform something that you probably played, dozens of times. And he wants to be perfect. Like, I don't go to work and come home and say, I'm going to practice in the simulator how to do a calf. or tell me a little bit more. Help me understand that desire for being on your game all the time. What drives it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't think the idea of practice is to attain perfection, as much as it may look like that. I think, look, either of us could play this program without having practice today. It wouldn't necessarily feel as good. So practicing is also a ritual, and it puts you in a creative space. So you want to open your mind to a certain type of listening, and we have a ritual of practicing, which has a certain physical thing that happens. Our fingers limber up, and we are more accurate when we do it. But it's more about opening our minds to listening. That ritual of practice, that hour is preparing us for.
For me, it's I am quite agitated when I don't practice. My state of mind is really not at peace with myself. I think it's fair to say we all strive to achieve ultimately peace within ourselves, which is, I guess, one of the more lofty goals of life. And practicing helps, if that's your term of reference. And for instrumental players, it is a term of reference. As I mentioned earlier, it's your voice, it's your soul. So yes, you have to limber up, or you feel better limbering up, but it's also psychological, tremendously psychological, to put yourself, to reassure yourself that you can actually do this. That's another thing, because nothing is ever given, and you keep having to reassure. I anyway do keep having to reassure myself that I can actually do this.
One of the things, we've done a number of things in the last couple of days, working with different chamber musicians, right? So young kids in the incredible program that Robert Uchida and Keith Ham and Julia Resch and others have gotten off the ground. It's just tremendous. So, a few dozen young kids that we got to see. And then some older students in the U of A. There was one group, a string quartet, and they came on stage. We only had about 20 minutes to work, and I think they spent about 7.5 minutes tuning. But it was so beautiful, because it wasn't about getting the instruments in tune. I could have just walked over and adjusted their pegs, and away we go. But it was one person playing the A and just quietly and generously giving it to and I just kind of watched and thought, this is awesome. This is taking me back to what it was to be in a professional quartet, where the tuning is not about attaining perfect intonation. It's about coming together and opening your ears. And I didn't need to hear them. I knew that tradition of high-end chamber music was being taught here in Edmonton, just by witnessing that incredible, generous and they were going to take as much. I mean, it was this beautiful ritual, right? I mean, a ritual that actually I did learn from this guy. So
I want to say one thing, because Barry and I, when we're on the stage together, we're usually not talking. We're usually playing. But I want to share with you that Barry is one of my most beloved buddies and friends. I have known Barry since he was 17. Was it 17? About
20 years ago.
20 years ago. Right. And I was teaching, I was at the time in the Orford String Quartet, and we were quartet in residence at the University of Toronto, and he taught chamber music. And of course, part of my role was to coach quartets. And I met Barry then, and we have stayed lifelong friends ever since in a, for me, extraordinarily meaningful relationship, which is enhanced immeasurably by the music that we share and the belief that we have, both each one of us in our own individual way, in encouraging young people, in bringing music to those people who don't know about it and who discover themselves through music.
Mm-hmm.
And we've shared the stage together. We confide in each other in different ways, musically and personally. And it's just great to be here with you.
Well, and there's something very, Dennis, he talked about his experience having COVID. Already, if the pandemic wasn't, awful enough, I was the one that got the call from your brother, who called. He said, Barry, it's Boris Brat calling, and I just want you to know that Dennis isn't going to make it through the night. I'm like, what are you? First of all, we speak basically every week, and I knew he was in Europe, and I just sort of lost touch. I was like, pandemics, I haven't heard from him. I didn't know you were sick. And he wasn't supposed to make it through the night. For me, this was, witnessing Dennis's recovery was pretty stunning. And then what was utterly impossible to comprehend is he almost dies. He can't play the cello. Can't walk. And it was only a few weeks before he's like, listen, I got this great project. I got to run this by you. I'm going to ask the city of Montreal for $150,000. I'm creating an orchestra of young people. We got to funnel the money to these young. I'm thinking, we Jews don't have enough guilt. Now I have to have more guilt that in the pandemic, the one friend of mine who almost dies from COVID is kicking my butt in creative projects. I'm like, are you out of your mind?
It was the drugs.
But he did it.
It was the drugs. It sure was.
He did it, and he hired a bunch of my students and other people, and off this orchestra goes with recovering dentists around Montreal. And
yeah, this was actually a fun project because we brought together a chamber orchestra of 16 people. We paid each person $1,000 a week for 6 weeks. 1 week was rehearsal, and then we gave 22 concerts, all free, in public venues where safety measures could be carried out, distancing outside or inside. And it gave employment and we had national auditions, and as you can imagine, a lot of people applied because they were out of work. So this was amazing. A fun project. But of course, the first person I turned to see if I wasn't completely crazy was Barry.
And I said, don't do it, you're crazy.
Yeah. And I did it anyway.
Yeah, I didn't listen when you learn the violin. Don't do it, you're crazy.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I'm still trying. But we're rapidly running out of time. We would love to spend like hours with you guys listening. And just in the last 2 minutes, 1 minute each, please. If there was one thing that you don't think that we should forget as humans through this pandemic, what should it be?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's pretty simple, right? It's the power of community, and that's for me. That's the takeaway from COVID is that's reinforced in pretty much every aspect of my life, from my relationship with my kids and my wife at home to the people on the street to this. That is really all that, for me, all that matters.
hard to put that into 1 minute.
I'm doing an Andrew
for
Cheng
me.
thing.
Yeah.
Just,
It's fine. I mean, I know we have to do that. Look, I think this journey has been different for each one of us, and each one of us in some way, shape, or form has suffered, has learned not to take for granted what is in our lives, the blessings that we live with as Canadians every day. Didn't realize until suddenly we don't have the things and can't enjoy the freedom. And this question of freedom, I think, is really a takeaway about how precious that is and how we need to celebrate having it. Because illness, and you as physicians, many of you, know how that robs you of that freedom. And COVID was a reminder that we are at the end of a string as far as that's concerned, and should be grateful for our health and grateful for the love and the life that we have around us, including each other.
and I'd like to extend my deepest gratitude for both of you for joining us tonight and sharing your stories, and you're going to share the stage with us and sharing your music.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
So in putting together this event, I really wanted to use the power of music to draw together different people from different backgrounds within our Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry. Over 20 members of our faculty came together for a series of rehearsals to create what you will hear tonight, to perform music, to bring us all together as a community, friends, family, and colleagues.
So how we got the idea for this musical event was in September. We were at the Banff International String Quartet competition, and we ran into Barry Schiffman. And Barry had done an event with the Faculty of Medicine a few years ago, and we wanted to bring him back, and we also met Mr. Dennis Brott. And we thought it would be nice to have Mr. Brott come along. And as we were thinking about it, I suggested to Jonathan it'd be nice not just to have a concert for the faculty, but actually to raise an orchestra from within the students, staff, and faculty of medicine, and put on an event where we could all come together and make some music and build community.
So I play music because I love it. It's fun, and it's been great to meet other people who love music, who are in medicine, and find that an outlet like this is great for keeping one sane in these times.
I joined this orchestra because I was missing being a part of something bigger than just myself, and it's really exciting to be back and playing music in person with people after the pandemic and meeting a lot of different musicians and colleagues within the faculty itself.
I'm a fourth-year medical student who's currently going through CARMS, hoping to get into family medicine, wanting to practice Roed Family eventually. So for me, I was really excited for this chance to come together with other healthcare practitioners and dust off my instrument a little bit. I loved that the theme was about COVID and kind of this recovery and coming back together after COVID, because I did play in orchestras a little bit as a kid, and I remember the first time we just started playing this piece. I was maybe 12, and the cellos came in, and I was like, oh, I can do something with my violin, but playing with this cello at the same time does something else. And so it's been really fun to kind of relive those childhood excitement about doing things together and coming together and how that can change what we can do.
We didn't have to audition, so we don't have to be professional, but it's a lot of fun. You have to listen to each other. You have to try and play in tune at the same tempo. But when everything comes together, you feel as part of a team. And the music, it's so beautiful. So I'm very grateful to Dr. Choi for organizing this, especially for Val Sim, our concert master, who's such a great teacher. And she really encourages us and teaches us how to play together and how to play musically.
Please join me in welcoming the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry Chamber Orchestra and our concert master, Dr. Valerie Sim.